Imagine you're standing in the middle of a sun-drenched plain 70 million years ago. The ground trembles beneath your feet, not from an earthquake, from footsteps. A massive shadow blocks out the sky above your head. You look up, and what you see defies everything you thought you knew about the limits of life. A creature as tall as a 7-story building, longer than 3 buses lined up end to end, weighing as much as 10 African elephants combined. Its neck alone stretches further than a telephone pole, swaying gently as it tears leaves from trees that themselves tower 30 meters into the air. That's Argentinosaurus, one of the largest creatures ever to walk this planet. And standing beneath it, you're no larger than the claw on its hind foot. I want you to really sit with that image for a moment, because we say large so casually when talking about dinosaurs. We've heard it so many times that it stops meaning anything. But this is something else entirely. This is a living animal the weight of a naval vessel, walking around, eating, breathing, existing in a world that somehow supported such impossible creatures. For 165 million years, creatures like this ruled every corner of Earth. To put that in perspective, modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Dinosaurs dominated for a period more than 500 times longer. They walked on every continent. They fed in every forest. They hunted across every plain, every river delta, every coastal marsh. Their size was the ultimate weapon. It made them virtually invulnerable to every threat the natural world could throw at them. When you're that big, you don't worry about predators. You don't worry about competition. You simply exist, and the world arranges itself around you.
But here's the cruelest irony in the history of life on Earth, and I think about this a lot, actually. It's something that keeps coming back to me whenever I study extinction events. That very size, the greatest advantage they ever possessed, the trait that made them rulers of this planet for longer than we can meaningfully imagine, ultimately became their death sentence. Not because something stronger came along, not because they were outcompeted, but because the rules of the game changed. And when the rules change, the traits that made you dominant can become the traits that destroy you. The story of how that happened is more complex and more dramatic than anything you've probably been told. It's about biology, physics, chemistry, and astronomy colliding in a way that changed life on Earth forever. It's not a simple story of rock falls, dinosaurs die. It's much deeper than that. This is the story of why size killed the dinosaurs. To understand why dinosaurs grew so enormous, you first need to understand the planet they lived on, because Mesozoic Earth was nothing like the world we know today. If you could travel back in time and see it from space, you might not even recognize it as the same planet. Let's start with the map. If you looked down at Earth from orbit at the beginning of the Mesozoic, you wouldn't see anything familiar. No Atlantic Ocean, no Pacific as we know it. Instead, all the continents were fused together into one supercontinent called Pangaea, a Greek word meaning all lands. Think about that. Every piece of dry land on Earth smashed together into a single massive landmass surrounded by one global ocean. No barriers between continents. Animals could walk from what would become Antarctica to what would become Alaska without ever crossing water. But Pangaea didn't last. Tectonic forces slowly tore it apart. Cracks appeared. Rifts widened.
The Atlantic Ocean began as a narrow channel between what would become Africa and South America, a channel no wider than the Mediterranean is today. But it kept growing, centimeter by centimeter, year after year, million of years after million of years. By the end of the Mesozoic, the world map was beginning to look vaguely familiar, but still very different. India was still an island drifting toward Asia, a collision that would create the Himalayas, but was still millions of years away. North America was split in half by a massive inland sea called the Western Interior Seaway, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. If you stood in what is now Kansas, you would be standing at the bottom of a warm, shallow sea. But the biggest difference between Mesozoic Earth and modern Earth wasn't the climate. Mesozoic Earth was far, far hotter than today. And when I say hotter, I need you to understand the scale. CO2 levels were 4 to 8 times higher than the modern era. That meant an extremely powerful greenhouse effect. Global average temperatures were roughly 10 to 15 degrees Celsius warmer than today. To put that in practical terms, the average temperature in London today is about 11 degrees Celsius. In the late Cretaceous, the average at that same latitude would have been around 23 to 26 degrees, closer to modern Miami. There was no ice at either pole. Let that sink in for a moment. No ice at the South Pole, no ice at the North Pole, no glaciers anywhere on the planet.
Both polar regions were covered in temperate forests, trees, ferns, undergrowth in places that today are buried under kilometers of ice. Fossils of subtropical plants and even crocodilian relatives have been found in Arctic and Antarctic sediments. The entire planet was warm, from equator to pole. And here's what mattered most for the dinosaurs. Vegetation blanketed the entire planet. Dense, lush, unimaginably productive vegetation. Tropical and subtropical rainforests stretched from the equator to latitudes that today are frozen tundra or cold deserts. Giant ferns that stood as tall as small trees. Ancient conifers towering dozens of meters high. Cycads, those palm-like plants with thick trunks and crowns of stiff leaves. Ginkgo trees growing in vast groves. The amount of plant biomass on Earth during the Mesozoic was significantly greater than today. Some estimates suggest 2 to 3 times greater. All of that vegetation meant one thing above all else: food. Unimaginable quantities of food, enough to sustain creatures so large they would seem like science fiction if we didn't have their bones to prove they were real. I find this fascinating, honestly. When I try to picture the Mesozoic, I don't think of it as a prehistoric world. I think of it as a different planet entirely. A greenhouse planet, hot, humid, overflowing with vegetation. Every ecological niche packed with life. Those were perfect conditions for evolution to push the boundaries of what a living body could be, and evolution, given those conditions, did exactly that. It experimented with size on a scale that's never been matched, before or since. There's a principle in evolutionary biology called Cope's rule, named after the paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope. Through his extensive study of fossils, he observed that over evolutionary history, animal lineages tend to increase in body size. Descendants tend to be larger than their ancestors. Given enough time, species tend to evolve to become bigger. Now, it's not an absolute law. There are exceptions. Some lineages get smaller. Evolution doesn't follow rigid rules.
But the general trend is clear and well documented across many different animal groups. Why does evolution so often favor larger size? Because being big brings powerful survival advantages. Let me walk you through them one by one, because understanding these advantages is crucial to understanding why their loss was so devastating. First, defense. When you're the largest creature in your environment, the number of predators that can realistically threaten you drops to nearly zero. Think about it. An adult Brachiosaurus weighing around 50 tons had no natural enemies. None. What predator in its right mind would attack a living animal the size of a building? Even the largest carnivorous dinosaurs would have thought twice before trying to take down a healthy adult sauropod. A single accidental step from a sauropod could crush a predator. A swing of that enormous tail could shatter bones. Size was the ultimate shield. Second, thermoregulation. This comes down to simple physics. As a body gets larger, the ratio of its surface area to its volume decreases. Why does this matter? Because heat is lost through the surface. A small animal with a large surface area relative to its volume loses heat rapidly. A large animal with relatively small surface area compared to its mass retains heat far more effectively. This phenomenon in very large creatures is called gigantothermy. A large dinosaur could keep its internal temperature remarkably stable throughout both the heat of day and cool of night, regardless of how ambient temperatures fluctuated. This thermal inertia gave large dinosaurs a massive physiological advantage, allowing them to remain active around the clock. Third, movement efficiency. This sounds counterintuitive at first, but it's well-established physics. Per kilogram of body weight, a large animal actually expends less energy to move than a small one. The reason has to do with stride length and momentum. A single step from Argentinosaurus covered several meters. A mouse takes hundreds of tiny steps to cover the same distance, burning proportionally far more energy. This meant large dinosaurs could cover vast territories with relatively little energetic cost. Fourth, exclusive food access. Consider the sauropods with their extraordinary necks, some stretching 10, 12, even 15 meters long. These necks allowed them to feed on vegetation at heights that no other land animal could reach. They had, in effect, an exclusive restaurant closed to every other species. Same principle that gives modern giraffes their advantage, but pushed to an extreme that giraffes can only dream of. And fifth, reproductive competition. In many animal species, larger males have a significant edge in securing mates. Size signals genetic fitness, health, the ability to survive. Females tend to favor larger mates. Males compete physically for access to females, contests where size provides overwhelming advantage. This created a positive feedback loop, pushing body sizes larger with each generation. Stack all 5 advantages together, and you understand why evolution kept pushing dinosaurs toward greater size. Natural selection continuously rewarded bigness. But here's what people often forget, and this is something I think about constantly when studying extinction events. Every single advantage comes with a price tag. There's no free lunch in biology. Every adaptation that helps in one way creates vulnerability in another. The price of being colossal was extraordinarily steep, and for 165 million years, the dinosaurs never had to pay it. Until they did.
Before we get to those costs, let's take time to truly appreciate just how big these animals actually were. Because raw numbers on a page are abstractions. You need to place them in context to grasp what we're talking about. The sauropods, the long-necked, long-tailed, plant-eating giants. Not just the largest dinosaurs, the largest animals ever to walk on land, period, in the entire 4.5 billion year history of this planet. Argentinosaurus wincolensis, discovered in Argentina in 1987 by a rancher who initially thought he'd found a large piece of petrified wood. What he'd actually found was a single shin bone, a tibia, that was taller than most adult humans. Subsequent excavations revealed an animal of almost incomprehensible proportions. Estimated weight 70 to 80 tons. Length approximately 35 meters from head to tail. If Argentinosaurus was standing next to a modern apartment building, its head would be looking through the windows of the 6th or 7th floor. Its body was longer than a Boeing 737 aircraft. Each of its vertebrae was over a meter tall. When a herd of these animals moved through a landscape, the ground would have trembled like a minor earthquake. You could have felt their approach before you could see them. Patagotitan maiorum, discovered in Patagonia in 2014 by a farm laborer who spotted an enormous bone protruding from a rocky outcrop. When paleontologists excavated the site, they found not one, but 6 individuals, allowing for unusually precise size estimates. Weight, approximately 69 tons, the combined weight of roughly 12 African elephants, or about 9 London double-decker buses. Its femur measured 2.4 meters in length, making it taller than most NBA basketball players. A single Patagotitan would have outweighed an entire herd of modern cattle. Dreadnoughtus shrani. The name itself tells you everything you need to know. It means fears nothing. Named after the class of early 20th century battleships considered invulnerable. Weight, approximately 65 tons. Every time I read these numbers, I have the same thought. How? How could any living creature made of the same basic materials as you and me, bone, muscle, sinew, grow to such outrageous dimensions? Surely there must be some limit. Surely at some point an animal just becomes too big to function. What was different about sauropods? The answer lies in a suite of extraordinary biological innovations, a combination of adaptations that, taken together, created a body plan uniquely suited for extreme gigantism. First, and most fundamentally, their skeletal system. Sauropod bones weren't solid like yours or mine, or even like those of elephants. They were pneumatized, riddled with air pockets and chambers, similar to the bones of modern birds. If you cut a sauropod vertebra in half, it would look almost like a honeycomb, a complex lattice of thin, bony struts surrounding air-filled spaces. This architecture made their skeleton dramatically lighter than it would have been if the bones were solid, while still providing the structural strength needed to support tens of tons of body weight. If sauropod bones had been dense and solid like elephant bones, the skeleton alone would have been so heavy the animal might not have been able to stand. Second, their respiratory system. Dinosaurs didn't breathe like mammals. They had a system similar to modern birds, with air sacs that extended throughout their bodies and even into their bones.
Air flowed through their lungs in one direction only, extracting oxygen far more efficiently than mammalian lungs.
This supercharged metabolism could support the enormous energy demands of a giant body. Third, their long necks served as biological cranes. Unlike mammals, sauropods didn't need to pump blood against gravity to a brain held high above the heart. Their brains were relatively small. The neck was essentially a food-gathering appendage that could sweep across vast areas without the animal taking a single step. Maximum food intake for minimum energy expenditure. Fourth, their reproductive strategy. Sauropods laid eggs, sometimes dozens at a time. This meant they didn't invest as much energy in each individual offspring as mammals do, allowing them to channel resources into their own growth. These innovations created a body plan uniquely suited for extreme gigantism. But every one of them came with hidden costs, costs that wouldn't matter until they suddenly mattered more than anything else in the world. Here's where I have to be honest about something that bothers me when people talk about dinosaur extinction. We often frame it as the asteroid killed the dinosaurs, full stop. Simple cause, simple effect. But that's not quite right. It misses the deeper story. The asteroid was the trigger, yes, but what made the gun loaded in the first place? Size. Let me explain what I mean. The first hidden cost was caloric demand. A large body needs enormous amounts of food. Not just a lot of food, enormous amounts. The largest sauropods may have consumed 400 kilograms of vegetation daily. That's roughly the weight of a grand piano every single day, just to maintain their body weight, not even to grow. In good times, with vegetation everywhere, this wasn't a problem. Food was abundant. But think about what happens when food becomes scarce, even a little scarce. A small animal can survive on scraps. It can find seeds in cracks, insects under bark, fungi on rotting logs. It can make do. A large animal can't. There's a minimum intake below which the body begins consuming itself. Muscles break down, fat reserves deplete, organs start to fail. And that minimum for a sauropod was measured in hundreds of kilograms per day. I think of it like this. Being huge is like driving a vehicle with terrible fuel efficiency. Great when gas is cheap and plentiful. You can go anywhere, do anything, dominate the road. But catastrophic when the pumps run dry. Suddenly, that giant engine becomes a death sentence. The second cost was habitat dependency. Large animals need large territories. They need vast ranges with reliable food sources spread across them. They can't adapt to small spaces. They can't hide in burrows when conditions deteriorate. They can't shelter under rocks or in tree hollows or in the cracks of the earth. They're exposed, vulnerable to whatever the environment throws at them. A mouse can survive in a basement. An elephant cannot. A shrew can live in a collapsed ecosystem, scavenging whatever remains. A sauropod cannot. Size commits you to a certain kind of existence, and that existence requires a functioning, productive environment. The third cost, and this one is critical to understanding what happened, was slow reproduction. Tyrannosaurus rex needed approximately 15 to 20 years to reach full adult size.
During its teenage years, between roughly age 10 and 18, it went through a dramatic growth spurt, gaining roughly 1.5 to 2 kilograms per day. But before and after that spurt, growth was slower. And 15 to 20 years is a long time to be vulnerable. Too small to defend yourself from larger predators, too young to reproduce.
For the truly giant sauropods, the numbers are even more extreme. Some estimates suggest the largest species may have needed 30 years or more to reach full adult size. 30 years of continuous eating, growing, and surviving predation before an individual was mature enough to reproduce and contribute to the next generation. And it gets worse. Incubation time added to the problem. A groundbreaking 2017 study analyzed growth lines preserved inside fossilized eggshells, microscopic daily rings laid down as embryos developed. The researchers found that dinosaur eggs took approximately 3 to 6 months to hatch, roughly twice as long as birds with similarly sized eggs. Think about that. Half a year of eggs sitting in nests on the ground, exposed to predators, vulnerable to flooding, susceptible to fungal infection, at risk from every possible environmental hazard. Every day those eggs sat there was another day something could go wrong. And then there was infant mortality. Fossil evidence from nesting sites paints a grim picture. Many eggs never hatched at all. Some were infertile, others were destroyed by predators or environmental conditions. Of those that did hatch, many juveniles were killed within days or weeks. Small theropods, early mammals, lizards, even some birds actively raided dinosaur nests and hunted hatchlings. Conservative estimates suggest that fewer than 10% of dinosaur hatchlings survived to adulthood. Some researchers put the figure even lower. 9 out of 10 baby dinosaurs died before reaching maturity. Now, let me make the comparison that reveals why this matters so profoundly for catastrophe survival. Consider a common house mouse. Gestation period, about 20 days. Litter size, 6 to 12 pups. Time to sexual maturity, approximately 6 weeks. A single pair of mice under favorable conditions can produce thousands of descendants within a single year. Their population growth is explosive, almost exponential.
The contrast with sauropods could not be more stark. 30 years to maturity, long incubation, high infant mortality, slow population turnover. Now ask yourself, what happens when a catastrophe strikes? If a disaster wipes out 90% of a mouse population, the survivors can replenish their numbers within a handful of years. The population bounces back almost as quickly as it crashed. Mice are resilient, not because they're tough, but because they reproduce fast. But if 90% of a sauropod population is wiped out, with a generation time of 30 years, with fewer than 1 in 10 young surviving to adulthood, with food sources potentially devastated by the very catastrophe that killed their parents, recovery could take centuries, millennia, and that's assuming conditions improve. In the scenario we're building toward, they absolutely would not. Slow reproduction meant large dinosaurs had no demographic safety net, no ability to quickly rebuild their numbers after a population crash. In good times, this didn't matter. Stable environments, abundant food, low adult mortality made slow reproduction perfectly viable. But in a crisis, slow reproduction became a noose around their necks. And the crisis that was coming would be unlike anything this planet had ever experienced.
There's one more piece we need to understand, the structure of Mesozoic ecosystems, because this is what made everything else matter. Every ecosystem on Earth, from a coral reef to a boreal forest to a desert oasis, operates on one fundamental principle. Energy flows from the bottom up. It begins with the sun. Sunlight strikes Earth's surface. Plants capture that solar energy through photosynthesis, converting it into chemical energy stored in their tissues, sugars, starches, cellulose. Herbivorous animals eat those plants, converting plant energy into animal energy. Carnivorous animals eat the herbivores, converting herbivore energy into predator energy. This is the food chain, one of the most basic and universal patterns in all of ecology. Each level in this chain is called a trophic level. And here's the single most important rule governing how trophic levels work. Energy transfer between levels is extraordinarily inefficient. Every time energy passes from one trophic level to the next, from plants to herbivores, from herbivores to carnivores, roughly 90% of that energy is lost. It dissipates as metabolic heat. It's used for movement and bodily maintenance. It's excreted as waste. Only about 10% of the energy at each level actually gets incorporated into the biomass of the level above. This 10% rule has profound implications. Let me apply it to the Mesozoic with some simplified numbers. Imagine a patch of Cretaceous forest that produces 10,000 kilograms of plant matter in a year. Of that 10,000 kilograms, only about 1,000 kilograms gets converted into herbivorous dinosaur flesh. And of that 1,000 kilograms, only about 100 kilograms gets converted into predatory dinosaur flesh. This means that for every kilogram of T-Rex standing in a forest, there need to be 10 kilograms of herbivore dinosaurs supporting it, and 100 kilograms of plants supporting the herbivores. The numbers cascade downward in a dramatic pyramid shape. This is why ecosystems are often visualized as energy pyramids. Wide at the base where the producers live, extremely narrow at the top where the apex predators reside. And this is why apex predators are always rare. There simply isn't enough energy flowing through the system to support large numbers of top-level consumers. Every T-Rex that walked the Earth was supported by a vast, invisible pyramid of biological productivity beneath it. A pyramid of plants, herbivores, decomposers, and microorganisms, all interconnected, all dependent on each other, all necessary. Now think about what this means for system stability. The Mesozoic ecosystem was like an enormous Jenga tower. You know the game where you build a tall structure by stacking wooden blocks and then carefully removing them one at a time. Each block in the Mesozoic tower represents a factor: plant productivity, insect populations, herbivore populations, predator populations, decomposing microorganisms, climate patterns, rainfall, temperature, ocean currents, soil nutrients. All of these factors are interconnected. All of them depend on each other. Remove one block and the others shift to compensate. Remove two and the tower starts to creak. Remove a critical block from near the base and the entire structure comes crashing down. The Mesozoic Jenga tower had stood for an almost inconceivable length of time, hundreds of millions of years of continuous, dynamic stability. But it was still a Jenga tower.
And like all Jenga towers, it had a critical property. The taller and more elaborate it became, the more vulnerable it was to sudden disruption. I think about this a lot when considering complex systems, not just ecosystems, economies, civilizations, technologies. The more complex and interconnected something becomes, the more spectacularly it can fail. Complexity is power, but complexity is also fragility. And in the final few million years of the Cretaceous, there were signs the tower was already beginning to sway. Now, here's something most people don't know. Earth wasn't in good shape when the asteroid hit. The planet had already been under siege from within long before it was attacked from without. About 250,000 years before the impact, one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history began. The location, Western India, a region geologists call the Deccan Plateau. The event, the Deccan Traps. This wasn't a single volcano. This wasn't even a chain of volcanoes. It was a continental-scale eruption system, a series of massive fissure eruptions that cracked open Earth's surface over an area of hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, pouring out unimaginable quantities of molten rock over hundreds of thousands of years. The total volume of lava produced has been estimated at over 1 million cubic kilometers. To visualize that, it's enough molten rock to bury the entire territory of France under a layer of lava several kilometers deep. Today, the solidified remains of these eruptions still cover approximately 500,000 square kilometers of western India, an area roughly the size of Spain. But the lava itself wasn't the real killer. Lava flows, however massive, are ultimately local phenomena. They destroy everything in their path, but the path is limited. The real planetary-scale damage came from gases pumped into the atmosphere. Two gases in particular, in absolutely enormous quantities. The first was sulfur dioxide. When sulfur dioxide reaches the upper atmosphere, it combines with water vapor to form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid called sulfate aerosols. These aerosols are extraordinarily effective at reflecting incoming sunlight back into space. The result is rapid cooling at the surface. Even relatively small volcanic eruptions can produce noticeable cooling. The 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo, a moderate eruption by geological standards, lowered global temperatures by about 0.5 degrees Celsius for 2 years. The Deccan Traps was orders of magnitude larger. The cooling pulses it produced may have dropped global temperatures by several degrees at a time. The second gas was carbon dioxide. Unlike sulfur dioxide, which washes out of the atmosphere relatively quickly, CO2 persists for centuries to millennia. And CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It traps heat. So the Deccan Traps produced a paradoxical climatic whiplash. Short-term cooling from sulfur aerosols, followed by long-term warming from accumulated CO2. Temperature swings, climate instability, environmental chaos. Earth's climate during the final hundreds of thousands of years of the Cretaceous was anything but stable. Temperatures oscillated, ocean chemistry shifted, sea levels rose and fell. Ecosystems that had been stable for millions of years were subjected to repeated environmental shocks. The dinosaurs were already stressed when the asteroid arrived, already weakened, already pushed. This is something I find genuinely tragic in a way. The dinosaurs didn't face a single catastrophe. They faced a 1-2 punch, weakened by volcanic chaos then finished by the asteroid. It's like being in a car accident while you're already sick with the flu. Either one might be survivable, both together, much harder. And now we arrive at the asteroid itself. 66 million years ago, an asteroid roughly 10 to 12 kilometers in diameter, about the size of Mount Everest, traveling at approximately 20 kilometers per second, struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The impact site is called the Chicxulub crater, buried beneath sediments but still detectable through geophysical surveys. The energy released was equivalent to roughly 100 trillion tons of TNT. Let me put that number in perspective. That's over 1 billion times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. More energy than all the nuclear weapons ever built, detonated simultaneously, multiplied by 1,000. It's a number that essentially stops meaning anything because it's so far beyond human experience. Within seconds, a fireball larger than the sun expanded from the impact point. Temperatures within hundreds of kilometers reached thousands of degrees. Every living thing within that radius didn't just die, it was vaporized. Didn't burn, didn't cook, vaporized.
Turned to gas instantaneously. The impact launched billions of tons of rock into space, not just into the air, into space. Some of that rock escaped Earth's gravity entirely, and tiny pieces of Chicxulub have been found on the Moon and on Mars. Much of it fell back to Earth over the following hours, heating the atmosphere through friction until the sky itself became a broiler. Surface temperatures may have spiked by hundreds of degrees for several hours. Forests ignited across entire continents, not from direct heat from the impact, but from the heat of the falling debris. And this was just the first few hours. In the days and weeks that followed, dust and aerosols spread through the stratosphere, that stable upper layer of atmosphere where particles can persist for years because there's no rain to wash them out. A thick, opaque veil descended over the entire planet. The effect was like slamming shut the blinds on every window in a house all at once. Sunlight was blocked. Research estimates solar radiation reaching Earth's surface dropped by up to 80 to 90% for a period of months to years. Some models suggest that at the peak of the dust loading, photosynthesis was severely impaired across most of the planet. Not completely stopped everywhere, but reduced to a small fraction of normal. And when photosynthesis stops, everything stops. Because photosynthesis is the process by which virtually all food on Earth is ultimately produced. Every plant, every tree, every blade of grass runs on sunlight. Remove the sunlight, and the plants die. When the plants die, the herbivores that eat them die. When the herbivores die, the carnivores that eat them die. The entire food chain, that carefully balanced energy pyramid we discussed, collapsed from the bottom up.
Someone had just dynamited the foundation of the building, and every floor above it was about to come crashing down. Global temperatures plummeted. Multiple lines of evidence suggest average surface temperatures dropped by somewhere between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius within months of the impact. A planet that had been tropical from pole to pole, with no ice anywhere, was plunged into near freezing or below freezing conditions across much of its surface in a geological instant. Acid rain compounded the devastation. Sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides blasted into the atmosphere by the impact, combined with moisture to produce sulfuric acid and nitric acid, which rained down on the surface for months or years.
This acid rain damaged or killed much of the surviving vegetation, acidified soils and freshwater systems, and altered ocean chemistry. In the seas, acidification began dissolving the calcium carbonate shells of marine organisms. The darkness persisted for an estimated 1 to 2 years. Only gradually did sunlight return. But then the removal of cooling aerosols unmasked the warming effect of CO2, leading to intense greenhouse warming after the freeze. The climate whipsawed from extreme cold to extreme heat. During that period of darkness, cold, starvation, and chemical devastation, every organism faced one question: can you survive this? And the answer depended, more than any other factor, on one thing: size. The KPG extinction, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, wiped out approximately 75% of all species on Earth. 3 out of 4 species that existed before the impact, gone, vanished, erased from the tree of life forever. It was the 5th and most recent of Earth's great mass extinctions, and while not the largest in terms of species loss, the KPG was uniquely devastating in the speed and totality with which it dismantled the dominant ecosystems of its time. But here's what makes this extinction truly fascinating from a scientific perspective. It wasn't random. It wasn't like rolling dice across the tree of life. The extinction followed a pattern so clear, so statistically overwhelming, that once you see it, you can never unsee it. Let's look at who died. Completely extinct, every single species of non-avian dinosaur. The sauropods, gone. The ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs like Triceratops, gone. The hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, gone. The ankylosaurs, the armored dinosaurs, gone. The theropods, from mighty T-Rex down to smaller species like Velociraptor, gone. Every single one. Completely extinct, all pterosaurs, the flying reptiles that had been masters of the sky for over 150 million years, gone. Completely extinct, all mosasaurs, the apex predators of the late Cretaceous oceans, gone. Completely extinct, all plesiosaurs, the long-necked marine reptiles, gone. Completely extinct, all ammonites, gone. Now let's look at who survived. Mammals survived, but the mammals that survived were almost exclusively small. Most weighed under 1 kilogram. Many were the size of mice or shrews. Birds survived, but only certain lineages. Crocodilians survived. Turtles survived. Lizards and snakes survived. Amphibians survived. Fish survived. Insects survived. Do you see the pattern? The survivors were overwhelmingly small. The victims were overwhelmingly large. A landmark 2012 study found that almost no land animal weighing more than 25 kilograms survived the KPG extinction. That threshold marked the approximate upper limit of what a creature could sustain during a prolonged food shortage. I want to be careful here. The 25 kilogram figure is an estimate. Biology rarely has hard cutoffs, but the overall trend is unmistakable. Let me explain what this means in practical terms. A small mammal weighing 1 kilogram might need only a few grams of food per day. Seeds, insects, fungi, carrion, scraps that larger animals couldn't survive on. And these food sources would still exist even in that devastated world. Dead bodies, organic detritus, fungi feeding on dead matter. A small mammal could burrow underground, escaping temperature extremes and acid rain.
Underground, temperatures remain relatively stable. Small animals could enter torpor or hibernation, reducing metabolic needs by up to 90%. They could wait out the crisis. And small animals could reproduce quickly. Even if 99% died, survivors could rebuild within years. Large dinosaurs had none of these options. They couldn't burrow, they couldn't hide, they couldn't reduce their food needs below a certain threshold. They couldn't reproduce fast enough to recover. They were completely dependent on a functioning ecosystem. When photosynthesis collapsed, they were doomed. Not because they were stupid or poorly adapted. They were superbly adapted for the world as it was. What they couldn't do was adapt to the world as it suddenly became. And that distinction between being well adapted and being adaptable is the distinction that separates the survivors from the extinct in every era, in every ecosystem, in every age. There's something I find deeply sobering about this, something I think about often. We tend to think of size as strength. Bigger is better, bigger is powerful, more dominant, more likely to survive. And in stable times, that's often true. The dinosaurs proved that for 165 million years. But in unstable times, size becomes a liability. The very traits that make you dominant when everything is working, massive energy needs, slow reproduction, dependence on complex systems, become the traits that destroy you when the system breaks. This is, I think, one of the most important lessons in all biology, maybe in all of history. Dominance is not the same as resilience. Power is not the same as adaptability. The traits that lift you to the top of the world can be the same traits that drag you into extinction. And here's the part that should send a chill down your spine. The cycle has repeated. After the dinosaurs vanished, mammals emerged from the shadows. Tiny creatures that had spent 160 million years hiding in burrows, running from dinosaur predators. And freed from competition, they did exactly what evolution always does. They got bigger. Cope's rule kicked in again. Within tens of millions of years, mammals produced their own megafauna. Paraceratherium, the giant hornless rhinoceros, 5 meters tall at the shoulder, 15 to 20 tons, the largest land mammal ever. Woolly mammoths, standing 4 meters tall, with tusks over 3 meters long. Saber-toothed cats with canines like kitchen knives. Giant ground sloths the size of elephants. The age of the giants had returned. And then those giants went extinct too. Starting roughly 50,000 years ago and accelerating around 10,000 years ago, megafauna on every continent except Africa began disappearing. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, cave bears, dire wolves, giant wombats, moas, gone, one after another, in a geological instant. The causes are debated. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age played a role, but there's overwhelming evidence that one factor was paramount: a bipedal, big-brained primate that had developed sophisticated hunting tools and a talent for cooperation. Us, Homo sapiens. We were the asteroid that the megafauna never saw coming. I think about this often. Africa still has megafauna because African animals evolved alongside humans for millions of years. They learned to fear us. Animals on other continents met us as a fully developed, technologically sophisticated species.
they didn't know to be afraid.
By the time they learned, it was too late. Today, the pattern continues, and this is where it becomes personal. Elephants, hippos, rhinos, gorillas, all classified as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. We're hunting them, destroying their habitats, fragmenting their populations, pushing them toward extinction. African elephant populations have fallen by over 60% in 50 years. Rhinos are being poached for their horns. Mountain gorillas survive only in tiny, heavily protected reserves. In the oceans, blue whales and other marine megafauna are in decline. We nearly hunted blue whales to extinction in the 20th century. Meanwhile, the creatures that thrive, rats, cockroaches, pigeons, bacteria, are small, adaptable, fast-breeding generalists. The same profile that survived the KPG extinction. The same profile that seems to survive everything. Ecologists sometimes ask with a grim smile, are we the next asteroid? Are humans, with our carbon emissions, our deforestation, our plastics, our pesticides, engineering a sixth mass extinction? The data suggests yes. Current extinction rates are estimated at 100 to 1,000 times higher than the natural background rate. We are, right now, living through a mass extinction. But here's the deeper question, the one that keeps me up at night. In this extinction we're causing, which side of the 25-kilogram line do we fall on? Think about it. We are large, slow-reproducing, energy-hungry creatures. Our gestation is 9 months. We typically have one offspring at a time. It takes nearly 2 decades for that offspring to reach maturity. We are utterly dependent on complex ecosystems for food, water, and air. We have built civilizations that require enormous resources to maintain. We have created supply chains spanning the planet. We are, in the language of this documentary, megafauna. And megafauna are always the most vulnerable when the world changes. The dinosaurs thought their dominance would last forever. They had 165 million years of evidence. They were wrong. Are we making the same mistake? There's no deeper lesson in evolutionary biology than this. No strategy is the best forever. There's only what works right now, in current conditions, against current challenges. And right now can change, sometimes slowly, over millions of years, sometimes catastrophically, in the time it takes a rock to fall from the sky, or in the time it takes an industrial civilization to alter the chemistry of the atmosphere. The dinosaurs stood on top of the world for 165 million years, the most successful group of large animals this planet has ever seen. And their size, the very thing that made them supreme, destroyed them when the environment shifted beneath their feet. Will we learn from their mistake? Or will we, like them, discover too late that dominance is not the same as invulnerability, that power is not the same as resilience, and that the traits that lift you to the top can be the same traits that drag you into extinction? So, the next time you see a pigeon on the sidewalk, or a sparrow in a bush, or a crow perched on a lamppost, really look at it, because you're looking at a dinosaur.
You're looking at the descendant of creatures that survived the worst day in the history of life on Earth. Not because they were the biggest, not because they were the strongest, not because they were the most powerful, but because they were small enough, flexible enough, and adaptable enough to endure what the giants could not. They are living proof that in the long game of evolution, it isn't the mighty who inherit the Earth. It's the adaptable. 165 years of dinosaur supremacy ended in an instant by the very thing that made them great. That is the lesson of size. That is the story of why size killed the dinosaurs. And perhaps that's a lesson worth remembering.